good morning, everybody. Welcome to today's CHDH seminar. I'd like to start by acknowledging the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, the traditional owners of the land of we're meeting, and pay my respects to elders and traditional knowledge holders. It's my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Helen Zhao. Helen is senior lecturer in linguistics, so she's visiting from the linguistics department, but a lot of the work she does really is psychology, in my opinion. So she works on topics including second language acquisition, topics related to psycholinguistics and cognitive linguistics, and she uses a range of methodologies, including behavioral experiments, EEG, corpus studies, and so on. So, Helen, really glad you're here and looking forward to your talk about image schematic diagrams in second language processing.
Thank you, Charles. Welcome to my talk, and I'm finally glad that I made the connection to psychology and to the lab, and I'm really looking forward to sharing my previous research and my current research with you. So today I'm going to talk about a topic which I'm really interested in. It's cognitive linguistics and also psycholinguistics, and the topic is image schematic diagrams in second language processing. So first of all, what is an image schema? That is the essential theoretical concept related to this work. So image schema, the notion of image schema is related to this fundamental assumption of embodied cognition, which argues that human cognition is shaped through perceptual motor experiences. It's an assumption held by many cognitive linguists. And image schemas are patterns of recurring bodily experiences that emerge throughout sensory motor activity and from our perceptual understanding of action and events in the world. In other words, image schemas are the basic cognitive structures and the schemas that we use to navigate the world. Image schemas arise from our everyday interaction with and observation with the world around us. And just to give you an example of some fundamental basic image schemas to have a sense of what image schemas are. So these are the basic image schemas according to the nature of their experiential grounding, and they can be divided into different categories or domains. Let's say with regard to the space domain, we have these image schemas like up, down, front, back, left, right, near, far, and so on. And containment is another schema kind of domain. We have the container schema. So the container schema, this is not like a concrete container, but like an abstract notion. Like, for example, we observe water in the glass, and that would be the water contained in the boundary of the glass. We can also imagine ourselves conceptualize this room as a container, like we are contained in this room, or we are contained in this building. So this notion of containment with conceptualizing objects with boundaries as container. And the other domains like locomotion, balance, force, and so on and so forth. So these are the fundamental sort of image schematic structures that we use to conceive, to perceive the world, and to interact with the world. So cognitive linguists like to use diagrams to represent our understanding or our analysis or description of different image schematic structures. And I'm giving you two kind of typically used examples to illustrate the container schema. So in a basic schematic diagram, there are two basic elements. One is what we call a landmark, and the other one is a trajector. Landmark, with the abbreviation LM, stands for the ground, and the potentially more static objects with reference to a potentially movable object, and that's the trajector, that's the figure. So it represents figure and ground relationship. So these two schematic diagrams, we can see the bounded landmark in which there is a trajector that is potentially moving. So, and this diagram represents the in schema, versus the diagram on the right-hand side represents the out schema. That is, there is a potential movable trajector that is potentially moving exterior to outside, exterior to the boundary of the landmark. Okay, and there are different image schematic diagrams that have been developed by different cognitive linguists to represent, for example, prepositions, which is the focus of my research. And that can create some issue, actually, for applied cognitive linguists who want to make use of schematic diagrams to do something for research or for teaching. I'm giving you here 3 examples of 3 different types of diagrams developed by George Lakoff in the classic 1987 cognitive linguistic work. And in the middle is Taylor and Evans, which is the one that I like to adopt. And it's also the current kind of dominant cognitive linguistic framework for representing the different semantic meanings of prepositions and also creating these diagrams. Lindstrom work on the right-hand side, that's more for pedagogical purposes, but these are all kind of diagrams. And on the upper side, these are the diagrams that represents the above sense of over. So you can see there is a trajectory that is higher than a landmark, but they're represented in 3 different ways, representing 3 different analyses of the cognitive linguists. On the bottom half, these are the 3 diagrams that represents moving from one side to the other, that sense of over. For example, walk over the bridge or climb over the wall. So you're imagining that there is an object on the starts from one side of the landmark and then move high up and then across to the other side of the landmark. And then again, here represented in 3 different ways. Yeah, so these are schematic diagrams as examples. And because I work on applied linguistics and second language pedagogy, so I am also interested in how these diagrams have been used in pedagogical research. And in fact, that in the recent 2 decades, we have seen a rising number of empirical studies that apply these kind of schematic diagrams in language pedagogy to try to teach second language learners to acquire these complex meanings of especially prepositions, because they are abstract meanings and spatial meanings. And many cognitive applied linguists feel that using diagrams to illustrate these spatial meaning is going to help second language learners to acquire these meaning. So diagrams is one of the commonly used tools in these cognitive linguistic inspired pedagogical research. So here I'm again giving you some examples of these diagrams being used in empirical research. And here, Tomoto and Lowen, 2007, this one is again for using diagrams to teach prepositional meaning. Here, this one is trying to teach over. As you can see, it's a different diagram, again, representing that moving from one side to the other, that sense. In the middle, top one, that's from Taylor, and that diagram is used to teach English modal verb. Can you guess which modal verb is that? Modal verbs is are verbs like can, should, must, could, might. These are modal verbs. Will. Actually, that's good. That's right. That's a will. Yeah. And then the right-hand side top corner is English tense. I'll let you make the guess. And then these are bottom half. So they're used in actually to teach English mostly, but also other languages like German, Russian, and Japanese. Mostly using to teach, these are mostly used to teach the semantic aspects of the grammatical structures. Okay, but you can probably tell that there is a much kind of a high variety of different kinds of diagrams in pedagogical research, and these studies also produce very mixed findings. Not all of them reported effectiveness of the instruction. Actually, many of them reported that the experimental group that adopt these diagram-based pedagogy did not outperform the control group. Okay. And I was one of these researchers who are interested in applying the diagram to teach English grammatical structure. In this case, is preposition, and I adopt the computer-based approach. So I actually designed what I call the English preposition tutor, which is a cognitive tutoring system to teach English prepositions. And the key pedagogical tool that I use is diagram. And there are 2 studies that have been published based on the research findings of my tutor. And one is in language learning, and the other one is studies in psycholinguistic acquisition. And there is the link here. And let me just quickly show you. Here is, if you just follow the link, you can see the demo tutor. This version of the tutor is already like a later updated version, not exactly the same as the one that reported in language learning and SSLA. This is like a follow-up work. But then in the training here, I'm just showing you the cognitive linguistic treatment condition. So here in this tutor, that 3 prepositions got trained: at, in, and over. And
sorry to jump in, Helen, but I think the tutor is showing a different thing than your slide, and it's not getting shared on the screen. You might have to go to share screen again.
So if you stop sharing.
Yeah.
stop share.
We'll share a different window.
And then I just share everything.
And
Oh.
yep.
Like that?
Yeah, so we can see it now. Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay, yep. So then this is so in the first part of the tutor, then the learners get trained on the basic notion of schema and then diagram, and then they are taught to understand what is a landmark, what is a trajectory through some example sentences, and then they get to see that these are the 6 schemas that we teach in this tutor. This is actually an animated diagram of the study. And now they get to the practice part. So in this version, that the task that they go through during training is essentially a picture sentence matching task. So they see a picture, and then they see 2 sentences on the right-hand side. The nail is in the wooden board, the nails is on the wooden board. So the 2 sentences only differ on the preposition, and they need to make the choice of which sentence fit the picture. So the picture sets the semantic context for the target sentence. And in the first version of the tutor that I designed, they make the choice out of the 2 sentences, and they get immediate feedback. The feedback differs based on the condition that they are assigned to, whether it's the diagram-based feedback condition or just a correctness feedback, whether their choice is right or wrong. So just that contrast. In this version of the tutors, we call this a mediation tutor. So we ask them to reflect on the trajectory and then the landmark, and then they make the choice, and then they get feedback. So it's a little bit complicated. Yeah, so just want to show you a taste, a glimpse of the tutor. So if we can just come back to the slides.
you may need to share them. Stop sharing.
No,
it's working.
It is working. Okay, great. Okay, so this is a screenshot of the schema-based feedback condition. So again, they see the picture, pick a sentence that match the picture, and then they get immediate feedback. The schema-based feedback show them the diagram and give them a descriptive a description of what the landmark is, what the trajectory is, and what's the relationship between the landmark and the trajectory as illustrated by the diagram in the sentence. And that's contrasted with the correctness feedback that they only get correct or incorrect feedback of their choice. So I will only talk about this SSLA study rather than the language learning one, because this one I think might be more interesting to you. This is a ERP study. This study I collaborate with colleagues from South China Normal University. They have an ERP lab, so they provide the methodology, the EEG methodology, and I provided the theoretical and the methodological guidance of the project. So in this study, it's an experimental design. So participants did pre-test and training, 2 sessions of training, and then post-test. And we measure both of their behavioral performance and also of their EEG performance at the pre-test and the post-test. So we scan them twice, before and after training. And the main instrument that we use to collect both behavioral judgment data and also EEG data is an acceptability judgment test. The key manipulation here is the type of preposition. So we show them the test includes 3 types of prepositions, either correct preposition, like the girl waved at the mosquitoes near the pond, versus a distractor preposition, the girls waved to the mosquitoes, very nicely and friendly, which is problematic. And a very, very wrong preposition used. The girl waved across the mosquitoes, which is obviously wrong, because semantically that's very odd. And we were mostly interested actually in the distractor preposition condition, because this is the type of preposition use we predict that second language learners have most trouble with. We believe that they should be able to differentiate correct from wrong prepositions, and that would generate enough N400 for us to see that they are actually doing meaningful work on the task. But we are actually keen to see whether there is any, they are able to differentiate correct prepositions from distractor prepositions, and whether their changes on the distractor prepositions is the one that actually shows more training effects. So this is the task procedure. So it's unit by unit presentation. Every sentence is chunked into 5 to 8 units per sentence, and the preposition always landed as the 3rd unit. So they first see the head noun phrase, and then the verb, and then preposition. So that's the fixed screens. The flexibility of the units or just differs based on the after the preposition. And every screen is shown for a fixed amount of time for 500 milliseconds. And there is a 500 milliseconds interval between each screen. And we are primarily interested in the N400 component, and time is locked to the onset of the preposition where the manipulation of the violation was positioned. Okay, so I just want to show you the key finding here, because the focus is on distractor prepositions. I'll just talk about this finding. This is the wave to the mosquito type of preposition usage. And this brainwave graph show you, this is the finding on the schematic, the schema-based diagram. And this shows the difference in the brain amplitude between the pretest, the difference between the pretest and the post-test. As you can see that the pre and post brain waves have lots of differences as opposed to correctness feedback, that the pre and post brain amplitude almost do not have any difference. It shows that correctness feedback did not help learners to make any differentiation in their judgment of the distractor preposition versus the schema-based feedback conditions actually helps to create a significant difference in terms of the brain, the average brain amplitude at the pre and post. However, even though that we see a pre-post a significant difference in the schema-based feedback condition on the judgment of distractor prepositions, the general violation main effect was still not significant at the post-test. So even after training, the schema-based feedback conditions still did not kind of yield a robust effects that shows learners were able to tell the difference between correct and distractor. So the training still wasn't robust enough to yield that main effect. We know that they are making more efforts, but the effort was not robust enough to show that they are sensitive. So it shows there's some effect, but limited. So that kind of prompted me to dig more into like exactly what's the role of the schematic diagram in kind of mediating second language processing. So instead of directly going to instruction, I came back to the area of processing to try to understand more of what's going on in the learner's mind. Yeah, so it's kind of a reverse approach. Typically, we first go to look at second language processing and then try to apply it in instruction. In this case, my approach actually was the reverse. So yeah, so here's more now this is the main focus of my today's talk, is what's the role of image schematic diagram in mediating psycholanguage processing? That's the general question. And I'll talk about two empirical studies based on actually my wonderful PhD student, Menghan Wang, and she has been doing a lot of work on this topic. So two experiments. The first one is a offline processing task. Then in this task, we use essentially a kind of a classic task paradigm in this area of research, which is called sentence diagram verification task. Technically, it's called sentence picture verification task. In this kind of task, very simple, participants are shown a sentence either visually or they get to hear a sentence, and then they see a picture. And in this case, we replace the picture with a diagram. Yeah, and then they're asked to judge if this visual stimuli match the sentence they either see or hear. In our task, we ask them to read, so we use visual presentation of the sentence stimuli. And we target two diagrams here. So we again target the containment schema into and out of the two diagrams that match with these two English prepositions. We collected data from two groups of participants. So one is L1 task, one is L2 task. And the L1 task is done by 20 adult L1 Chinese, Mandarin Chinese native speakers. And the L2 task is still done by Chinese native speakers, but they are actually learners of English. So we conduct the task in English, which is the participants L2. And the task stimuli in the two tasks are direct translation equivalents to each other, so that we can compare the L1 and L2 effects. And the experiment adopts a factorial design of 2 by 2 by 2, a Latin square design. So three main variables are a consideration. So first one is the path encoding. So path encoding here, the English into and out of, when it's translated into Mandarin Chinese, it's actually encoded in a verb system called Chinese directional verb, 进 and 出. So instead of prepositions in Mandarin Chinese, we actually use directional verb to encode path. And so we target the two kind of paths. One is enter, the other one into, the other one is out of. We also included two types of senses because there are previous research that shows these kind of mental simulation effects may differ as a function of the abstractness of meaning. So we included both the spatial sense and also the extended sense, the abstract sense. So for example, in a room or in a box or in a glass, these are the spatial senses. But in love, in depression, in anxiety, so in these kind of mental state is considered to be the abstract sense. And these are called, in cognitive linguists' definition, these are called the extended senses, because they're considered to be, the meaning of these metaphorical meaning are considered to be derived or extended from the spatial meaning as a function of conceptual metaphor. So we include two types of senses here, and we want to see whether there is a difference regarding the abstractness of sense, and then congruency. So whether the sentence meaning match the diagram or not. And the task procedures are exactly the same in the two tasks. And participants are given enough time to read the sentence. So they press next when they feel like they finish processing either the Chinese sentence or the English sentence. We also use other filler diagrams that represents other schematic domains so that they're not just seeing the into and the out of diagram. We also throw in some other diagrams. These are distractors. Results. So on the left-hand side are the L1 task results. On the right-hand side is the L2 results. So let's see. So good news, as in L1 task, we found the relatedness effect or the congruency effect as predicted. So when the diagram match the sentence meaning. So it's the into sense and then the into diagram. There is a facilitation effect. So the related diagrams, the reaction time for the related diagrams is faster than the unrelated diagram, and the effect size is quite big. But we found that this compatibility effect or the relateness effect is only shown on the into diagram, but not the out to diagram. So that's generally aligned with the previous prediction. So there's a compatibility effect. When it comes to L2, we found the opposite effect. So for L2 learners, first of all, the overall congruency effect wasn't shown. We only found a relateness and sense interactional effect. That is the effect yielded by this sentence diagram matching the congruency effect was only shown on the spatial senses. And it wasn't robust enough to kind of generate an overall main fixed effects on congruency. And second, it was the reverse finding. So L2 learners, when they read the L2 English sentences and then they see related diagram, in fact, they spent longer time processing that related diagram compared to an unrelated diagram. So this is what we typically call an interference effect, reported in these mental simulation studies. Not entirely surprising. It might surprise you, but actually this is something quite normal. There are previous studies that shows L2 studies yield these kind of interference effects or inhibition effects in the L2 when the cognitive demand is high. And when we plot in the L1 and L2 tasks, so here in this diagram here on the left-hand side, this is the Chinese data, so the L1 task. And on the right-hand side of this graph, these are the L2 data. And the green line represents the unrelated condition, and the red line represents the related condition. So as you can see here that the related condition in the L1 task yield much shorter reaction time compared to the unrelated condition, but it's reverse trend in the L2 data. And also the difference between related and unrelated was much smaller compared to the difference in the L1 task. So let's try to give some accounts to this kind of finding, why there's such a difference. Well, this kind of finding actually aligns well with some previous finding that shows that overall there was a reduced L2 mental simulation effect than L1 effect. And the fact that when participants see a sentence and then they see either a picture or a diagram, the assumption is that after they process that sentence, they somehow form a kind of mental imagery. They simulate what's going on as the spatial representation of that sentence. And then if they see a visual stimuli that either match that mental imagery or not, there would be an effect. So that's why we are trying to relate to the mental simulation of the studies, and which shows that generally L2 mental simulation was weaker compared to L1 mental simulation. And some reasons that underline this kind of phenomenon could be due to different facts. It could be because that some research shows L2 engages the motor cortex less strongly than L1. And a reason for that could be that L2 simply involve a weaker degree, a lower degree of embodiment. This could be due to the different nature of L1 and L2 experience. So in L1 learning, it was acquired through more embodied sort of context, that there is a stronger involvement of the learner kind of interacting with the external world. And meanings are acquired through more associative learnings in the socialization context, versus L2. In L2 learning is generally acquired through more limited socialization. It's more arbitrary connection between, let's say, L1 words and L2 meaning. It's embodied in that sense. We can also relate to, let's say, some L2 literature done by researchers like Michael Ullman, who makes an argument, not everyone agrees on this, that that could be different, just fundamentally different cognitive mechanisms and completely separate neural structures for L1 and L2. So therefore, the two types of, the two language learning processes are just fundamentally different. The brain areas, the neural structures, and the cognitive mechanisms that's being deployed for the two language learning experiences are also fundamentally different. So these could be the reasons why that we're observing, a reduced L2 mental simulation effect compared to L1. But you can also say that findings like this in an offline task only reflect post-comprehension mental imagery, because we ask them to finish processing the whole sentence and then we ask them to judge. Then, we don't really know what's going on while they are processing the sentence. In another word, if we do the experiment and incremental online sentence processing task, do actually language speakers formulate mental imagery as they process the sentence? How soon or how fast is mental imagery construed during online processing? And actually, there's less research on that. And so we want to dig more into that. So that motivates the second experiment that Bonghan and we did. So in this experiment, actually, we only focus on L1 because we just want to look at L1 first before we go to L2. And if L1 data is already difficult, then we'll see L2. So in this experiment, we look at the effect of diagram in L1, online incremental sentence processing. And 38 adult L1 Mandarin Chinese speakers were recruited. These are all students in our university. And we used a self-paced reading task, but there is a tweak in this self-paced reading task implementation. That is, we used an diagram interleaved paradigm integrated into the self-paced reading. And the task paradigm is not entirely new, even though it's not frequently observed in psycholinguistic research. And we modify it from a previous research by Settle and al. It's also an L2 mental simulation study. So this is how it looks like as a self-paced reading task interleaved with diagram. You can replace it with picture, like in Settle and al. They use picture. We just replace picture with diagram. So it's the moving window paradigm, the classic paradigm as in self-paced reading. They first see a fixation point, and then they see unit by unit in this sentence, and then they pace themselves as they read this sentence. And we only target the spatial sense of jing, so the into meaning here in this task. We did not include out of, because we want to limit the number of stimuli that they read. And because this is only a Chinese task, I'll have to talk a little bit about the linguistic structure in Chinese. So in Chinese, typically we encode the spatial directions in, this is called a resultative verb compound construction. And this resultative compound verb construction, it's composed of two components. One is what we call a displacement verb, and the other one is called a directional verb. The displacement verb is the one that indicates motion. So like walk or run or swim. That's the manner of the verb. And then the directional verb encodes the path. So we can say walk, then enter. So the second verb is actually not a preposition, it's a verb. So it's walk, enter, swim, enter, run, enter. That's the compound construction. The directional verb signals the directional result of the action implied by the first verb. That's the function of the second verb. And in this task, we have two conditions, two interleaved sequence. So either we put the diagram after the displacement verb. So here, this is the displacement verb walk. Right after the walk verb, they see the diagram. This is out of diagram. And then they see enter. All right, so the prediction here, we don't really predict them to show any effect because just seeing walk shouldn't actually yield any path, because the path is shown after the diagram. Yeah, but we just want to see how early that L1 speakers actually started to form mental imagery. So they start to actually predict mental imagery of the path right after they see the displacement verb, because after all, this is one unit of a construction. Or do they actually wait until they see the directional verb before they start to form the complete mental imagery? So that was the question. And that's why we had two sequences here of putting the diagram either before the directional verb or after the directional verb. We had three congruency conditions. So whether the diagram matched the directional verb, so it's into diagram, into verb, or enter, or whether it's out of and enter. And then we contrast that with a neutral condition, which is a series of hashtags as control. Here's the data of the diagram before the directional verb condition. Interestingly, we found that this is the prediction, the predictive processing finding. So right after Chinese native speakers see the displacement verb, walk, they already start to make prediction. And that prediction yields actually just an interference effect. So which means seeing the matching diagram did not yield any facilitation effects, but seeing a mismatching diagram slow down their processing. So which means they see the displacement verb walk, they make a prediction, and then they see a mismatching diagram, it slow down their reading time. And that slowdown effect was not seen in the spillover region, so the next one. So in the directional verb, finally, so walk into both regions, we see the interference effect, but then the further spillover region into, let's say, the room, there's no effect anymore. So the effect was only shown on the diagram region and also the following region. And we found the same interference effect. Again, seeing a matching diagram does not facilitate reading, but seeing a mismatching diagram slow down reading time. In the second sequence, that is, they see the displacement verb walk, and then the directional verb ting, and then the diagram. So seeing the diagram here, also a mismatching diagram slow down in the diagram region and also in the spillover region. So okay, all right. It's time to sum up. How am I doing with time? Okay, good, thanks. So this second experiment shows us that the mental simulation effect in L1 incremental sentence processing. We found that this compatibility effects that's yielded by the diagram in the first experiment, which is an offline processing task, was not yielded in the L2, in the second experiment, which is an L1 online processing task. Instead, we found this interference effect. And spatial configuration was construed immediately after the displacement verb was shown, even before the path information becomes available to the reader. They start to already construe the spatial, the spatial representation. And what could be going on here? We're still analyzing the data, so feedback most welcomed. And we're thinking that it could be due to incomplete construal of spatial configuration, because even after they see a displacement verb walk and the directional verb into and the diagram, they haven't seen the landmark. So we basically give them the trajectory, which is the head noun, and then the manner of the verb and the direction of the path of the verb, and that's it. We haven't actually trying to capture the main effect after they see the landmark, which is enter into where, right? So they have like an incomplete representation of the entire spatial representation. So the trajectory and the movements are there, but the landmark is not there. We haven't seen everything. So this interference effect in this L1 incremental sentence processing could be due to an incomplete construal of the entire spatial scene in the sentence. So we're actually doing a follow-up experiment that Mohan is going to collect data soon to add another third condition in which we will try to capture the effects by putting the diagrams after the entire trajectory and landmark information is being exposed to the participants and see what happens. Also, that another reason why we see an interference effect here is in the self-paced reading task, diagram is sort of kind of distracting their reading, smooth reading of the sentence. Participants are not asked to do anything about the diagram, that they like what they need to do is just to press and self-paced their reading, word by word, and then at the end they answer a reading comprehension question, but the question doesn't actually require them to consciously process the diagram. As opposed to, let's say, in some previous research that adopts self-paced reading task, interleave with picture, actually researchers explicitly ask participants to judge if the picture matched the meaning of whatever has been expressed in this sentence. So there's a much higher kind of explicit degree of requirement for participants to consciously process, like whether the visual stimuli match the spatial meaning in the sentence, which we didn't ask participants to do. So here, all they need to do is just to read the sentence. The diagram is sort of there to distract them, and it's kind of annoying. So, yeah. So we're wondering whether this conscious processing of the visual stimuli makes any difference. So we also, in this follow-up studies experiment, we will ask participants to do this at this verification procedure in the middle of the self-paced reading to see if this mental simulation effect in incremental sentence processing could only be shown when there is a higher degree of conscious processing involved. To summarize, we found in these experiments that L1 and L2 speakers form perceptual representation of mental scenes during offline and online sentence processing. Compatibility and interference effects in sentence image verification or self-paced reading task could be strongly influenced by the amount of cognitive processing load. So as we can see, even in L1 processing task, we can find simply interference effect instead of compatibility effects. This is native speakers processing in their native language. So it may not be really L1, L2, but simply the high demanding task that tends to yield kind of inhibition or interference effect. And heavier processing load for the processor could simply mean there's a stronger temporal overlap of perceptual formulation and language comprehension. There's just a more fierce competition between these two cognitive processes, that they're trying to formulate the perceptual representation at the same time they're busy processing for language, the lexical semantic information. And that leads to a weaker integration of these two processes. And that's why we see stronger competition and interference effect. When it comes to applied implications, then diagram for L2 pedagogies, maybe we need to use diagrams with caution because diagram may involve a higher degree of conscious processing. These are abstract symbols. They're not straightforward. As you can see, a lot of the diagrams I show you needs quite a bit of unpacking. An example, maybe explicit information about these diagrams is more essential for their applicability in L2 pedagogy. That's all. Thanks.
Thank you, Helen. We have time for questions. If you're in the room, please use them.
Thank you, Helen, for Thank you for the interesting talk. So just a quick question about the experiment one. So I'm wondering whether one of the kind of processing compounds could come from back translation in the past. So if they're reading the information in English, do you have any evidence that, you know, they're not translating them back to the L1? And that's interfering somehow, or adding to the interference.
And is with interference. How do we capture that? Because there's the whole sentence reading, and if they are doing backward translation, I just don't know if the task is allows us to examine that kind of a possible account.
Well, like, I guess I don't know if this would work in this particular task, but perhaps suppose that you first show the information in L1 and then in English, so you kind of already confuse the need to translate, so to speak.
And actually, no, sorry, it might be confusing the way that I presented it. Actually, the participants doing, these are two separate groups of participants. Yeah, so they either do the L1 task or the L2 task. So they don't, there are no overlapping participants for the two.
I understand, but for example, so if they read the sentence in English and they're confronted with the diagram, they might still be actually trying to figure it out in the native language. And that's kind of interacting with what they have to do with the diagram. Whereas in the first condition, for the participants, there's no need to translate.
Exactly. So I guess that's really linked to this argument that there is like a weaker degree of embodiment, because that for the L1, exactly as you said, when they read this sentence, they could directly just match through the embodied experiences, versus here it's mediated by L2 to L1. L1 cannot be shut down.
So I guess that's maybe a part of my question is also a suggestion would be to kind of preload the translations. So you're timing them with the Chinese sentence, and then by the time that they process the schematic, there's already this, at least at the translation of that's already, I don't know.
Oh, you mean adding like a L1 sentence?
Yeah, or some L1 information. Yes, that.
That's a good idea. Yeah. I think it's an interesting idea. Like, to prime, almost like L1 cross-language priming. Is that what you're thinking? Yeah.
I have other questions.
It's cool. It's cool. Yeah, thank you.
I have also a question related to L2. I don't know if you find any differences between IELTS 6.5 and IELTS 7.5, because a big difference between those levels of English, and it's those differences not only quantitative, it's not only quantitative and not like the qualitative stuff. So
yeah, as far as I remember, proficiency was not significant.
Yeah, so most of the participants are just from IELTS 6.5 to 7, and there's one outlier who's IELTS 7.5. So it's not a big, range. And also,
So proficiency was fit into the model as a covariate. It wasn't significant. Yeah, that's my understanding. Yeah, and also it wasn't a normal distribution. Most of these participants are 6.5. Yeah, these are master students in our program. They mostly have this proficiency score. So you're saying that maybe if we have more 7.5 or even higher proficiency.
I just started to think of that. Maybe students that have 7.5, they do less translation and it's more like how to read the process.
Yes, I think so.
6.5, like I use more like a translate and use the native language and try to understand the preposition, how it's working that way, the specific way.
Yes, I agree. Yeah, so yeah, definitely with some more advanced and neonative L2 learners, they can establish a more direct connection with the L2.
Was just wondering, it's similar to what Simon was saying, but you consider the fact that it might be that you naturally sort of process the visual stimuli in L1, so there's a sort of switch cost involved that isn't involved when you're already reading in L1. Like if it sort of instinctively triggers you to think of the visual in your native language, that the switch time is sort of dominating any other effects that you would see.
Switch times in, yeah.
Like if somebody was to be asked to explain what the diagram was indicating, which they might sort of do in their head, they might do that in their native language and not really ever instinctually do that
in the second language. That's right.
Which means that there's sort of an extra task here of switching language.
Yeah. I think we need to like adopt a bit more time-sensitive measure in order to capture that bit of the switching time, because here if they do the switch, it's more likely that they see the English sentence and they're given actually as much time as they need to read the English sentence. So I imagine that if L1 is involved, that's probably involved when they read the sentence. Right, they try to, maybe translate into Chinese and trying to understand, okay, this is what it means, form the mental imagery before they see the diagram. Yeah, just right now, the way it's conducted here, in terms of how we measure time, it's not really that refinedly trying to capture that. I see what you mean. I'm just trying to think about way like how we more refinedly capture that switching time. Yeah, maybe the cross-language priming.
Yeah, I mean, probably involve not letting it be a free timing thing.
Free time, yeah.
As in like giving an actual restriction.
Yeah, or we can actually set a fixed amount of time for them to read the sentence. Or just kind of show the sentence unit by unit and have it fixed. Like kind of giving them absolutely no time to have additional processing into translation into that one processing. Yeah.
Do you have data on how long they spend reading those sentences?
Yeah, we do. Yeah, actually, I want to add that point because we can compare the reading time of Chinese sentences and also English sentences to see if there's a significant difference in between their reading time of two sentences into languages.
There's definitely a significant difference.
But we didn't do that data analysis, so we can do it.
Yeah, that can be fit into the model as a covariate, but I wonder, yeah, because we're not really treating L1 and L2 as a variable here. We sort of just analyze the two sets of data separately and try to see the pattern. Because I'm kind of hesitant to put them into one integrated model, because the nature of L1 and L2 mental simulation could be just fundamentally different. It's problematic to just put them into one model and then, yeah, I mean, we'll definitely see L1, L2 effects here, but that's not what we're interested in. We're more interested in what's the different variation in patterns of L1 and L2 mental simulation stimulated by diagram.
Is it possible that there could be an effect of reading time on the competency test?
Reading time on the congruency, but yeah. So I think that's related to what that question is about, definitely. But it's hard for, as I said, it's hard to tease apart that, like, to what extent that additional times of translation affects the diagram judgment. Yeah.
Yes, still not right. I do have a question, like a more general question. I'm kind of fascinated also by the use of kind of the schematics for like pedagogical purposes. I mean, in this case, I'm just wondering, is it always the case that these schemas are static? in pedagogical purpose, but there are also like dynamic schemas used that actually show the motion and all that. And if so, could you also see some application in the research itself? Like you have a lot of online tasks. You could imagine something like a dynamic version of a picture word interference task where there's actually some motion going on or something like that. Because in general, like looking at some of the schema, I find them a bit complicated parts.
Very complicated.
The fact that there is static version of something that's actually dynamic might actually increase the task difficulty, might make it difficult to get the benefits that you'd expect from the schematic approach.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. The majority of these pedagogical studies use static diagrams, especially the earlier ones. I've seen some recent work that tried to use dynamic diagram to teach, especially if the target structure involved motion. Then the critique offered by some researchers is that static diagrams are simply not inadequate to represent accurately capture the movement, the dynamic movement of the whatever the meaning is being told. So there are work done that, and then there's the results show some effective findings. When it comes to, I like your comment that when it comes to that sentence diagram verification task, if we change the diagram to be a dynamic one, is that going to affect the reaction time measure?
And you can timestamp it. So basically what's happening in the diagram could be matched to the reading of the sentence. And that might be really a nice paradigm to test things on, say, an AHE type of study.
That's very cool. Yeah. Can I talk to you more about that?
Okay, please do. We've got to noon, so we'll stop here. Let's thank Helen again.
Thank you. Thank you very much for all your questions and feedback.